On March 22, 2024, a jury in Beauregard Parish, Louisiana, returned a verdict that would change multiple lives forever. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Tyler Neal Derochowski would spend the rest of his life in prison for the shooting that took Ashley Fish's life on April 7, 2022. But the path to that verdict was nearly 2 years long. 2 years of investigation, legal maneuvering, evidence gathering, and preparation. 2 years during which Ashley's 4 daughters grew up without their mother. 2 years during which both families waited for their day in court. This is the complete story of that trial. From the moment the jury was selected to the moment the verdict was read. From the opening statements that framed the case to the closing arguments that sealed Derochowski's fate. This is the trial that would determine whether Tyler Derochowski would be held accountable for taking Ashley Fish's life. Before we walk through every phase of this trial and analyze the legal strategies that shaped the outcome, if you want to understand how the criminal justice system works in murder cases, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what we're about to reveal will show you exactly how prosecutors and defense attorneys battle in the courtroom. And drop a comment telling us, do you think the trial system provides adequate justice for victims? Let's start at the beginning. April 7th, 2022. The day Ashley Fish lost her life. The day Tyler Derochowski called 911 and confessed to shooting her. The day that would eventually lead to a courtroom in Beauregard Parish. In the immediate aftermath, Derochowski was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He was held without bond in Vernon Parish Jail, as the Beauregard Parish Jail was closed at that time. The investigation proceeded. Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Office detectives gathered evidence. They processed the scene. They interviewed witnesses. They built their case. Meanwhile, Derochowski was assigned a public defender. The public defender's office would represent him throughout the legal process. In Louisiana, when someone is charged with second-degree murder, they face a mandatory sentence if convicted. Life in prison at hard labor, without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. There's no negotiation. There's no plea bargain that avoids that sentence. If you're convicted of second-degree murder in Louisiana, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. This means that for Derochowski, the stakes couldn't be higher. His only options were to fight the charge at trial or to plead guilty and accept life in prison. He chose to fight. The legal process in Louisiana involves several stages before a case goes to trial. There's the arraignment, where the defendant is formally charged and enters a plea. There are preliminary hearings. There are motions filed by both sides. The prosecution files discovery, providing the defense with all the evidence they plan to present. The defense may file motions to suppress evidence, to dismiss charges, to change venue. Both sides prepare for trial. In this case, the discovery process would have included the 911 call recording, police reports, forensic evidence, witness statements, autopsy reports, and any other material relevant to the case. The defense would review all of this evidence looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case, looking for inconsistencies, looking for alternative explanations, looking for anything that could create reasonable doubt. The prosecution would review the same evidence, strengthening their case, identifying their strongest witnesses, determining which evidence to present and in what order, crafting their narrative for the jury. Months passed. The case moved through the legal system. And finally, in early 2024, a trial date was set. March 2024. Nearly 2 years after Ashley's passing, the case would finally be heard by a jury. Let's talk about what happened in that courtroom. The trial began with jury selection. This process, called voir dire, is critical in any criminal case. The prosecution and defense both want jurors who will be sympathetic to their side, but they also need jurors who can be fair and impartial. In Louisiana, a jury in a felony case consists of 12 people. In a case involving a possible life sentence, the verdict must be unanimous. All 12 jurors must agree on guilt or innocence. During voir dire, potential jurors are questioned by both the prosecution and the defense. They're asked about their backgrounds, their beliefs, their experiences. The attorneys are trying to determine who will be favorable to their case and who should be excluded. There are 2 types of challenges attorneys can use to exclude potential jurors. Challenges for cause, which require a valid legal reason like bias or inability to follow the law, and peremptory challenges, which allow attorneys to exclude a certain number of jurors without giving a reason. In this case, both sides would have been looking for specific things in potential jurors. The prosecution would want jurors who take domestic violence seriously, who understand the dynamics of abusive relationships, who won't blame the victim, who will hold Derochowski accountable for his actions. The defense would want jurors who understand that even in a confession case, the prosecution still has to prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt, who won't be swayed purely by emotion, who will carefully consider whether the evidence proves specific intent. The process can take hours or even days. Potential jurors are questioned individually or in groups. Some are dismissed for cause. Others are struck by peremptory challenges. Eventually, 12 jurors and alternates are selected. These are the people who will decide Tyler Derochowski's fate. These are the people who will hear all the evidence and determine whether the prosecution has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Once the jury is seated, the trial can begin. The first phase is opening statements. This is where each side gets to present their theory of the case to the jury. Opening statements aren't evidence, they're roadmaps. They tell the jury what to expect, what the evidence will show, and what conclusion the jury should reach. The prosecution goes first. The prosecutor stands before the jury and begins to lay out the case against Tyler Derochowski. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor says, the evidence in this case will show you that on April 7th, 2022, Tyler Derochowski made a choice. He chose to pick up a weapon. He chose to use that weapon against Ashley Fish. And he chose to leave her without attempting to get her help. The prosecutor walks the jury through the timeline. Ashley Fish, 28 years old. Mother of 4 daughters, at home on a Thursday evening. Tyler Derochowski, her boyfriend of 2 years, in the house with her. At 5:50 p.m., Ashley sent a text message to the father of her children. A normal message about evening logistics. I'll have the girls call soon. Trying to do dinner and stuff. That was the last communication Ashley Fish had with anyone outside that house. 40 minutes later, Tyler Derochowski called 911. The prosecutor tells the jury they will hear that 911 call. They will hear Derochowski's own voice confessing to what he did. They will hear him say, I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead. They will hear him acknowledge that he left the house, that he left 4 children alone, that he never asked for medical help for Ashley. The prosecutor explains that when police arrived, they found Ashley Fish deceased in her home. They found the weapon Derochowski described. They found everything exactly as he said it would be. The evidence will show, the prosecutor continues, that this was not an accident. This was not a moment of passion where Derochowski immediately regretted his actions. This was a deliberate act followed by deliberate choices. Derochowski unloaded the weapon. He secured the area. He left the scene. He called 911 from a different location. He showed no concern for whether Ashley could be saved. All of these actions demonstrate specific intent. The prosecution must prove that Derochowski had specific intent to take Ashley's life or to cause her great bodily harm. And the evidence, the prosecutor argues, clearly demonstrates that intent. The prosecutor talks about the witnesses the jury will hear from. Officer Gladys Santiago, the 911 dispatcher. Corporal Joshua Stanford, who responded to the scene. Forensic experts who processed the evidence. Medical examiners who determined cause of passing. Ashley's mother, who will tell them about her daughter. The evidence will paint a clear picture, the prosecutor tells the jury. Tyler Derochowski shot Ashley Fish with specific intent. He knew what he was doing, he intended the result, and he should be held accountable. The prosecutor sits down. Now it's the defense's turn. The defense attorney stands and addresses the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense begins. The prosecution just told you about a confession. They told you about evidence. They told you about witnesses, and you're going to hear all of that. You're going to hear that 911 call. You're going to see the evidence. You're going to hear from those witnesses. But here's what you need to remember. The prosecution has the burden of proof. They must prove beyond a reasonable doubt every single element of second-degree murder. One of those elements is specific intent. They must prove that Tyler Derochowski had the specific intent to kill Ashley Fish or to cause her great bodily harm. And that, the defense argues, is where the prosecution's case falls apart. Yes, Tyler Derochowski shot Ashley Fish. He admitted that. He called 911 and confessed. He's not denying that the act occurred. But intent is different than action. Intent is what's happening in someone's mind at the moment they commit an act. And proving what someone was thinking, what they intended, is much more difficult than proving what they did. The defense explains that there are different types of homicide under Louisiana law. There's first-degree murder, which involves specific aggravating factors. There's second-degree murder, which requires specific intent. There's manslaughter, which involves killing without specific intent. All of these are serious crimes. All of them result in severe punishment. But they're different, and the differences matter. The prosecution is charging Tyler with second-degree murder. That means they have to prove he had specific intent. They have to prove that at the moment he pulled the trigger, he consciously desired to bring about Ashley's passing or to cause her serious harm. Can they prove that? The defense asks. Can they really prove what was in Tyler's mind at that moment? The defense acknowledges that the 911 call exists, that Tyler's actions afterward can be examined. But do those things definitively prove specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt? People respond to trauma in different ways, the defense argues. Someone who's in shock might sound calm. Someone who's dissociating might take actions that seem calculated, but are actually responses to extreme stress. The defense tells the jury that they will hear about Tyler's background, about his life, about the circumstances of this case, and they will ask the jury to carefully consider whether the prosecution has really proven specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard, the defense reminds the jury. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not probably, not maybe, not it seems like, beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's reasonable doubt about specific intent, then Tyler Derochowski cannot be convicted of second-degree murder. The defense sits down. Opening statements are complete. Both sides have laid out their theories. Now it's time for the evidence. The prosecution begins presenting its case. The first witness is Officer Gladys Santiago, the 911 dispatcher who took Derochowski's call on April 7, 2022. Officer Santiago takes the stand. She's sworn in. The prosecutor begins the examination. The prosecutor asks Officer Santiago to describe her role and her training. She explains that she's a 911 dispatcher for DeRidder Police Department. She's trained in emergency call protocols. She's handled thousands of calls during her career. The prosecutor asks her about the call she received on April 7, 2022 at approximately 6:30 p.m. Officer Santiago describes the call. A male caller identified himself as Tyler Derochowski. He stated that he needed to turn himself in because he had committed a crime. When asked what crime, he stated that he had shot his girlfriend and thought she was deceased. The prosecutor asks, did he request medical assistance? Officer Santiago, no. Did he ask for an ambulance to be sent to the scene? No. Did he express concern about whether the victim might still be alive? No. The prosecutor plays the 911 call recording for the jury. The courtroom goes silent. Everyone listens to Tyler Derochowski's voice. I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead. I didn't check on her, but I think she's dead. I unloaded the clip. There are kids at the house that need someone with them. The recording plays in its entirety. 11 minutes and 34 seconds of Tyler Derochowski providing details about what he'd done. When it finishes, the prosecutor asks Officer Santiago about her observations. How would you describe the caller's demeanor? The prosecutor asks. Officer Santiago explains that the caller was calm. He answered questions directly. He provided clear information. He didn't exhibit signs of extreme emotional distress that she typically hears in emergency calls. The defense cross-examines. The defense attorney asks Officer Santiago, "Are you a psychologist?" "No," she responds. "Can you determine someone's mental state from their voice on a phone call?" Officer Santiago acknowledges that she's not qualified to make psychological diagnoses. She can only describe what she heard. The defense asks, "Isn't it possible that someone in shock might sound calm?" Officer Santiago agrees that people respond to trauma differently. The defense is trying to create doubt about what the 911 call really proves. Yes, Derochowski sounded calm. But does that definitively prove intent? Or could it be a trauma response? Officer Santiago is excused. The next witness is Corporal Joshua Stanford, one of the officers who responded to the scene. Corporal Stanford takes the stand. He describes arriving at the Northridge Drive residence at approximately 6:35 p.m. on April 7, 2022. The prosecutor asks him to describe what happened when he arrived. Corporal Stanford explains that he approached the residence. The door was opened by a young girl, one of Ashley's daughters. The child informed him that her mother was in the bedroom. Corporal Stanford entered the residence and located Ashley Fish in the master bathroom. He checked for vital signs and determined that she had passed. He secured the area as a scene and called for additional units. The prosecutor asks about other children in the house. Corporal Stanford confirms that there were 4 children present. They were separated from the scene and were later placed in the care of family members. The prosecutor asks about the weapon. Corporal Stanford describes finding the firearm that Derochowski had mentioned on the 911 call. The magazine had been removed from the weapon, as Derochowski stated. The defense cross-examines. The defense asks Corporal Stanford about the scene. Was there evidence of a struggle? Were there signs of an altercation? Corporal Stanford describes the scene as he found it. without speculation about what might have preceded it. The defense is trying to establish that there might be more to the story than what's immediately apparent, that perhaps there was conflict or struggle that explains the incident. Corporal Stanford is excused. The prosecution calls forensic experts. A crime scene investigator testifies about processing the residence, about photographing everything, about collecting evidence, about documenting the scene in detail. A firearms expert testifies about the weapon, about the type of firearm, about how it operates, about the ammunition that was used, about the fact that the magazine had been removed. A medical examiner testifies about the autopsy, about the cause of Ashley's passing, about the nature of the injuries, about the timeline of events based on medical evidence. All of this testimony is technical, it's detailed, it's clinical, but it's necessary to prove the elements of the crime. The prosecution is building a comprehensive picture. They're showing that every detail Derochowski mentioned on the 911 call was accurate, that the physical evidence corroborates his confession, that there's no doubt about what happened. Then the prosecution calls Mr. Fish, the father of Ashley's children. Mr. Fish takes the stand. He testifies about his relationship with Ashley, about their 4 daughters, about the co-parenting arrangement they had. The prosecutor asks about April 7th, 2022. Mr. Fish describes receiving a text message from Ashley at 5:50 p.m. The message was about routine logistics, when the girls would call him. Normal evening coordination. The prosecutor asks him to read the message aloud. Mr. Fish reads, "I'll have the girls call soon. Trying to do dinner and stuff. I guess call when you're ready later. I'm still working on my situation here." That was the last communication he received from Ashley, he testifies. She never called later. The girls never called. The next day, he learned that Ashley had passed. The prosecutor asks, "What did you understand my situation to mean?" Mr. Fish says he didn't know at the time. The message seemed normal. He thought she was just dealing with regular evening activities. The defense cross-examines briefly but doesn't challenge Mr. Fish's testimony significantly. The text message is what it is. It exists. It was sent. It's part of the timeline. Then comes the most emotional testimony of the trial. The prosecution calls Sheila Krebsbach, Ashley's mother. Mrs. Krebsbach takes the stand. She's visibly emotional but composed. She's here to tell the jury about her daughter. The prosecutor asks her to describe Ashley. Mrs. Krebsbach talks about Ashley as a mother, as a daughter, as a person who put her children first in everything she did, who was active in her daughter's lives, who was loved by her community. The prosecutor asks about Ashley's character. Mrs. Krebsbach states clearly, "I never knew my daughter to be aggressive or physically violent." This testimony is critical. It counters any potential defense suggestion that there was mutual conflict or that Ashley was somehow an aggressor. The prosecutor asks about Tyler Derochowski. Mrs. Krebsbach explains that she knew Ashley was in a relationship with Tyler. She visited the house and saw him there, but they didn't interact much. She never saw any signs of violence or conflict, she testifies. She had no reason to think her daughter was in danger. The defense cross-examines gently. They ask about the frequency of her visits, about what she observed, but they don't attack her. You don't want to appear to be bullying a grieving mother in front of a jury. Mrs. Krebsbach is excused. The prosecution rests its case. They've presented the 911 call, the responding officers, the forensic evidence, the medical evidence, the victim's family. They've built a comprehensive case showing that Tyler Derochowski shot Ashley Fish and that his actions afterward demonstrated specific intent. Now it's the defense's turn. The defense has a difficult task. Their client confessed on a 911 call. The physical evidence supports that confession. The prosecution has presented a strong case. The defense's strategy is to focus on the element of specific intent, to create doubt about whether the prosecution has really proven that Derochowski consciously intended to bring about Ashley's passing. The defense calls Zygmunt Derochowski, Tyler's adoptive father. Mr. Derochowski testifies about adopting Tyler when he was 4 years old, about raising him, about Tyler's life and background. The defense is trying to humanize Tyler, to make the jury see him as a person with a history, not just as a defendant. But there's only so much this testimony can accomplish. The question isn't whether Tyler had a difficult childhood or whether he's a sympathetic figure. The question is whether he committed second-degree murder. The defense may call other character witnesses. They may present evidence about Tyler's mental state. They may bring in experts to discuss trauma responses or dissociation. But ultimately, their case rests on one argument. The prosecution hasn't proven specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt. After both sides have presented their evidence, it's time for closing arguments. This is the final opportunity for each side to address the jury, to summarize the evidence, to explain why the jury should rule in their favor. The prosecution goes first. The prosecutor stands before the jury and reviews everything they've heard. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor begins, you've heard all the evidence. You've listened to that 911 call. You've heard from the officers who responded. You've seen the forensic evidence. You've heard from Ashley's family. The evidence is clear. Tyler Derochowski shot Ashley Fish. He admitted it. He called 911 and confessed. There's no dispute about that. The question is, did he have specific intent? Did he consciously desire to bring about her passing or to cause her great bodily harm? The prosecutor argues that the answer is obviously yes. Look at his actions, the prosecutor says. After shooting Ashley, he didn't panic. He didn't call for help immediately. He didn't try to save her life. Instead, he unloaded the weapon. He secured the area. He left the house. He traveled to another location. And then he called 911. These aren't the actions of someone in a blind panic. These are deliberate choices made by someone who knew exactly what he'd done and what the consequences would be. When he called 911, he didn't ask for an ambulance. He didn't request medical help. He said he thought Ashley was deceased and that he needed to turn himself in. He told the dispatcher that there were children in the house who needed someone with them. He knew those children were alone. He knew their mother had been shot, and he left them there anyway. All of this demonstrates specific intent, the prosecutor argues. Derochowski knew what he was doing. He intended the result, and he should be held accountable. The prosecutor reminds the jury about Ashley, about her 4 daughters who will grow up without their mother, about the life that was taken on April 7, 2022. Tyler Derochowski made a choice that day, the prosecutor says. He chose to take a life. He chose to leave 4 children without their mother. He chose to commit murder. And now you must make a choice. You must decide whether the evidence proves, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he is guilty of second-degree murder. The evidence clearly proves it. The law requires you to find him guilty. Justice for Ashley Fish requires you to hold Tyler Derochowski accountable. The prosecutor sits down. The defense gives its closing argument. The defense attorney addresses the jury one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense begins. The prosecutor just told you that this is a clear case, that the evidence obviously proves specific intent, that you must find Tyler guilty. But that's not how our justice system works. The prosecution has the burden of proof. They must prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they haven't done that, you must find Tyler not guilty. Not because you think he's innocent, not because you condone what happened, but because that's what the law requires. The defense acknowledges that Tyler shot Ashley, that he called 911 and admitted it, that Ashley lost her life as a result. But the question isn't whether it happened. The question is whether the prosecution has proven specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt. And on that question, the defense argues, there is reasonable doubt. Intent is internal. It's what's happening in someone's mind. And proving what someone was thinking at a specific moment is extraordinarily difficult. The prosecution wants you to infer intent from Tyler's actions afterward, from the fact that he unloaded the weapon, from the fact that he left the scene, from the fact that he sounded calm on the 911 call. But do those things definitively prove that at the moment he pulled the trigger, he consciously desired to bring about Ashley's passing? People in crisis don't always act rationally, the defense argues. Someone in extreme stress or shock might do things that seem calculated, but are actually trauma responses. The defense reminds the jury that specific intent is a high legal standard. It's not enough to show that someone should have known their actions would cause a particular result. You have to show that they consciously desired that result. Has the prosecution really proven that? Has the prosecution shown, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tyler consciously desired Ashley's passing at the moment he acted? If you have doubt about that, the defense says, then you must find him not guilty of second-degree murder. This is a tragedy. Ashley Fish's passing is a tragedy. Her daughters growing up without their mother is a tragedy. No one disputes that. But your job isn't to make Tyler pay for that tragedy. Your job is to determine whether the prosecution has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you find that they haven't, then you must follow the law and return a not guilty verdict. The defense sits down. The prosecution gets a rebuttal. Since they have the burden of proof, the prosecutor stands one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor says, the defense just told you that there's reasonable doubt about specific intent, that you can't know what was in Tyler Derochowski's mind, but you can know, because he told you. He told Officer Santiago on that 911 call. He said, "I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead." He didn't say, "There was an accident." He didn't say, "I don't know what happened." He said, "I shot her." Active voice, intentional action, and then he made deliberate choices. He unloaded the weapon, he left the scene, he called from another location. He never asked if she could be saved. Those aren't the actions of someone who acted without intent. Those are the actions of someone who knew exactly what he'd done. The evidence proves specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt. The law requires you to convict, and justice for Ashley Fish demands it. Find Tyler Derochowski guilty of second-degree murder. The prosecutor sits down. Closing arguments are complete. The judge instructs the jury on the law. The judge explains the elements of second-degree murder, the definition of specific intent, the burden of proof, what reasonable doubt means. The jury is given written instructions. They're told that they must be unanimous in their verdict. All 12 must agree. The jury retires to deliberate. In the deliberation room, 12 people who have sat through days of testimony must now make a decision that will affect multiple lives. They review the evidence. They discuss the testimony. They listen to the 911 call again. They look at the photographs. They read the transcripts. They debate what specific intent means. They discuss whether the prosecution proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. They consider the defense's arguments about trauma and shock and uncertainty. Some jurors may be convinced immediately. Others may have doubts. They discuss. They deliberate. They work toward unanimity. In Louisiana, in a case involving a possible life sentence, the verdict must be unanimous. If even one juror has reasonable doubt, they cannot convict. The deliberations take hours. The jury reviews evidence. They ask the judge questions. They continue their discussions. And finally, they reach a verdict. The jury sends word to the judge that they've reached a decision. The courtroom is reconvened. The defendant is brought in. The families take their seats. The judge asks the jury foreman if they've reached a unanimous verdict. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge asks for the verdict form. The courtroom is silent. Everyone waits. The judge reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tyler Neal Derochowski, guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty." Ashley's family reacts with emotion, relief, grief, a sense that justice has been served even though it can never bring Ashley back. Derochowski shows little visible reaction. He's just been convicted of a crime that carries a mandatory life sentence. The defense may request that the jury be polled, asking each juror individually if this is their verdict. Each juror confirms, yes, the verdict is unanimous. 12 people agreed that the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tyler Derochowski had specific intent when he shot Ashley Fish, that he is guilty of second-degree murder. The judge thanks the jury for their service. They're dismissed. Their job is done. But the trial isn't quite over. There's still sentencing. In Louisiana, for second-degree murder, the sentence is mandatory. Life in prison at hard labor without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. The judge has no discretion. There's no sentencing hearing where both sides argue for different outcomes. The law specifies exactly what the sentence must be. On March 22, 2024, the judge formally sentences Tyler Derochowski to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tyler Derochowski will never be a free man again. He will spend the rest of his life in a Louisiana prison. He will never walk outside prison walls. He will never have another chance to harm anyone. After the sentencing, Beauregard Parish District Attorney Jimmy Lestage makes a statement. "This case is extremely tragic," he says. 4 young children are left to grow up without their mother because of the actions of this man. I hope the knowledge that he will be sentenced to serve out his natural life in prison brings some closure for them and for the rest of Ashley's family. Closure. That word again. Can there ever really be closure when a mother is lost? When 4 daughters will grow up without her? The trial is over. Justice, in the legal sense, has been served. Tyler Derochowski was held accountable for his actions. The system worked as it should. But for Ashley's daughters, the real sentence is different. They're sentenced to a lifetime without their mother. They're sentenced to growing up with the knowledge of how she was taken from them. They're sentenced to trauma and loss and grief that no verdict can remedy. The trial of Tyler Derochowski demonstrates several important aspects of the criminal justice system. First, it shows how criminal trials work, from jury selection through opening statements, witness testimony, closing arguments, deliberation, and verdict. This is the process by which we determine guilt or innocence in our society. Second, it shows the importance of evidence. The 911 call was critical in this case. Derochowski's own words convicted him. The physical evidence corroborated his confession. The witnesses provided context and detail. Third, it shows the role of specific intent in murder cases. The prosecution had to prove not just that Derochowski committed the act, but that he had specific intent, that he consciously desired the result. The jury found that the evidence proved specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt, and that finding led to the conviction. Fourth, it shows the mandatory nature of sentencing for certain crimes. In Louisiana, if you're convicted of second-degree murder, you will receive life in prison without parole. There are no exceptions. There's no judicial discretion. This ensures consistency. Everyone convicted of the same crime receives the same sentence, but it also means that individual circumstances can't affect the outcome. Fifth, it shows the human cost of domestic violence. Ashley Fish was a real person, a mother, a daughter, someone with hopes and dreams and a future. And in one evening, all of that was taken away. Her daughters lost their mother. Her family lost a loved one. Her community lost a member. The trial provided legal accountability, but it can't undo the harm. It can't bring Ashley back. It can't give those 4 daughters their mother back. What it can do is ensure that Tyler Derochowski faces consequences for his actions, that he's removed from society, that he can't harm anyone else. And perhaps in some small way, it can provide a measure of justice for Ashley Fish. The trial also highlights important lessons about domestic violence. According to experts, intimate partner violence often doesn't show clear warning signs. There may not be prior police reports. There may not be documented abuse. Neighbors and family may have no idea that violence is occurring. In Ashley's case, there was no documented history of violence between her and Tyler, no police calls, no reports from family or friends. And then, in one evening, the violence erupted with fatal consequences. This is why domestic violence awareness is so critical. We need to understand that the absence of visible signs doesn't mean the absence of danger. We need to educate people about healthy relationships. We need to provide resources for those who are experiencing abuse. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788 or visit thehotline.org. These services are free. They're confidential. They can help create safety plans, provide information about legal options, and connect people with local resources. If you're experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to have support. You deserve to live without fear. If you know someone who might be experiencing domestic violence, offer support. Listen without judgment. Help them connect with resources. Be there for them. Because the next Ashley Fish could be someone you know. And the next call to 911 could be prevented if we all pay attention, offer support, and take domestic violence seriously. The trial of Tyler Derochowski is over. The verdict has been reached. The sentence has been imposed. But Ashley Fish's story continues through her daughters, through her family, through the people who remember her and honor her memory. And through cases like this one, we can learn, we can educate, we can work toward preventing the next tragedy. If this breakdown of the trial helped you understand how the criminal justice system handles murder cases, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We're committed to providing educational content about legal processes, criminal trials, and domestic violence awareness. Drop a comment with your thoughts on the trial. Did justice prevail? What aspects of the legal process surprised you? What questions do you still have? Share this video to raise awareness about domestic violence and to help people understand how the legal system works. Rest in peace, Ashley Fish. The trial is over. Justice, in the legal sense, has been served. Your daughters will know that the man who took you from them faced full accountability under the law. Link for support the family in description.